In 1985, Steve Jobs was 29 years old, famous, rich, and already treated like a symbol of the future. He had helped build one of the most important technology companies in the world. He had put his name, his taste, and his will into the machines that made Apple different. And then, inside the company he helped create, he lost. Not in public first. Not with a dramatic collapse in front of cameras. It happened in meeting rooms, in board tension, in damaged trust, in the slow realization that brilliance was no longer enough. Apple had become too big, too political, too expensive, and too fragile for pure force of personality to hold together. The man who wanted total control over the future was suddenly watching other people decide whether he still belonged in it. That was the moment everything changed. Before he became a myth, Steve Jobs was not the obvious hero of Silicon Valley. He did not fit the polished model of a safe executive. He was intense, restless, often abrasive. He had a gift for seeing what people wanted before they knew it themselves, but he also had a reputation for pushing people beyond reason. He cared about the inside of products people would never open. He cared about packaging, fonts, curves, colors, and the feeling a machine created before it was even switched on. To him, technology was not just engineering. It was taste. It was identity. It was a statement about how the future should look. That obsession made Apple possible. In the beginning, Apple was a small rebellion. Jobs and Steve Wozniak were young, clever, and perfectly timed. The personal computer industry was still open enough for outsiders to matter. Wozniak had the engineering genius. Jobs had vision, persuasion, and a talent for making other people believe in something larger than a circuit board. Apple was co-founded in 1976 by Jobs, Wozniak, and Ronald Wayne, and it quickly outgrew its origin story. The Apple II became a major success. It turned Apple from a promising experiment into a real company. Jobs was no longer just a young man with ideas. He was becoming a public face of a new age. But success did not calm him down. It made him more demanding. Jobs was not satisfied with products that simply worked. He wanted products that changed behavior. He wanted them to feel inevitable. He wanted customers to see them and instantly sense that older machines belonged to the past. This is what drove him toward the Macintosh. The Macintosh was not just another computer project. For Jobs, it was a declaration of war against the dullness of the industry. He wanted a machine that was friendly, elegant, and radically easy to use. He wanted technology that ordinary people could connect with emotionally. That vision was real. So was the cost. People around Jobs often described an environment shaped by pressure. He could be magnetic, but also punishing. He inspired loyalty and exhaustion at the same time. He pushed teams hard because he believed average work was a form of failure. He could make people feel chosen one day and inadequate the next. For a while, Apple tolerated that because growth covered many sins. What matters when a company is winning? What matters when the founder seems touched by genius? Then the stakes got higher. As Apple grew, it stopped being a pure founder's playground. Investors mattered. Margins mattered. Manufacturing mattered. Internal discipline mattered. A visionary company still needed operational stability. Jobs understood products deeply, but he was less suited to the slow, institutional work of managing a large corporation. Apple needed leadership that could scale with the business. That pressure is one reason Jobs had recruited John Sculley from Pepsi in 1983 to become Apple's CEO. It was a bold move. Sculley brought corporate credibility. Jobs brought creative fire. On paper, it looked like a powerful pairing. In reality, it created a fault line. The Macintosh launched in 1984 with one of the most famous advertising campaigns in history. It made noise. It made headlines. It made Apple look fearless. But great launches do not automatically solve business problems. The Macintosh was admired for its interface and design, yet its early commercial performance disappointed expectations. It was expensive. Software support was limited. Sales slowed. Pressure inside Apple intensified. Jobs was still driving with the same force, but the environment around him had changed. Now every instinct, every demand, every clash had a larger consequence. And Jobs clashed. With executives. With structures. Eventually with Sculley. This is where the story stops being the story of a brilliant founder and becomes the story of a brilliant founder hitting the limits of his own method. Jobs wanted control. Not partial control. Not advisory influence. Real control. He saw compromise as weakness when it threatened the purity of the product. But companies are not products. Companies are systems full of people protecting different priorities: growth, discipline, predictability, authority. Jobs could bend reality around a product team. He could not bend an entire corporation forever. As tensions grew, the relationship between Jobs and Scully deteriorated. Their disagreement was not just about personality. It was about power and direction. Jobs still had enormous symbolic weight inside Apple, but symbolic weight is dangerous when business results are shaky and internal confidence is eroding. By 1985, the conflict became impossible to hide. Jobs tried to regain operational control. Scully resisted. The board had to choose. And when the moment came, they did not choose the founder. That is the part people often compress into a simple line. Steve Jobs was fired from Apple. But the truth is more precise and more revealing. John Scully did not single-handedly throw him out. Apple's board sided against Jobs in a power struggle and stripped him of significant authority. He remained chairman for a time, but he was no longer in meaningful control. For a man whose identity was fused with the company, that was devastating. Titles can survive. Power does not always. Imagine the emotional violence of that. The company bearing the shape of his ambition was still standing, but he had lost the ability to steer it. He had not just lost a role. He had lost the center of his identity. Apple was not a job he held. Apple was the proof that his way of seeing the world mattered. And now the institution he helped build was telling him that his intensity had become a liability. What does a person like that do when the world they built rejects them? At first, he was shaken. Publicly, this was humiliating. Privately, it forced a brutal confrontation with himself. Jobs left Apple in 1985. He was still young enough to start over, but old enough to understand what had just happened. He had reached the summit early, and then fallen from it in front of the entire industry. For many people, that kind of failure becomes a permanent scar. For Jobs, it became a second beginning. He founded Next, a new computer company aimed at higher education and advanced computing. Next did not become a mass-market triumph. In pure commercial terms, it was limited. But failure is not always empty. Next gave Jobs something he needed: distance, refinement, and a chance to keep building without the original mythology of Apple around him. He could still chase perfection. He could still obsess over design and integration. But now he was doing it as a man who had already been wounded by success. At nearly the same time, another move would prove just as important. Jobs acquired what became Pixar. That decision mattered not only financially, but psychologically. It connected him to a new kind of storytelling, a new kind of creative team, and eventually a new kind of public identity. When Pixar succeeded, it showed that his instincts could still help build something extraordinary outside the walls of Apple. He was no longer only the man who lost his company. He was becoming the man who survived losing it. That is what makes the 1985 turning point so powerful. It did not simply interrupt Jobs' rise. It exposed the cost of his gift. The same obsession that made him exceptional also made him dangerous inside a growing institution. His standards were real. His vision was real. But so were the consequences of the chaos he created around himself. The board did not remove a fraud. They sidelined a genius they no longer trusted to lead responsibly. That distinction matters. Years later, Apple would buy Next in 1996, bringing Jobs back into the company he had once lost. The return would become legendary. He would help transform Apple with products that changed entire industries. That comeback made the earlier fall look almost necessary, as if exile had purified him. But that interpretation can become too clean. The truth is harsher. The fall hurt because it was real. The comeback matters because it was not guaranteed. He could have remained a cautionary tale. He could have become one more brilliant founder remembered for early promise and internal self-destruction. Instead, he rebuilt. Not because pain automatically makes people wiser, but because some people are too restless to let humiliation be the final word. And still, the deeper lesson is not about neat redemption. It is about the price of greatness when it is driven by obsession. Jobs wanted the future so badly that he often damaged the people and structures around him. He built products people loved. He also created conflicts that nearly destroyed his place in the company he loved most. His turning point was not just professional. It was psychological. He had to confront the possibility that his greatest strength and his greatest weakness were the same thing. In 1985, Steve Jobs was not just a founder losing power. He was a man being forced to look at the shadow of his own ambition. That is why the moment still matters. Not because it was dramatic. Because it was true. Success had made him famous. Failure made him legible. And that is the part people miss. When Steve Jobs watched Apple move on without him, the legend was not ending. It was being stripped down to its most uncomfortable truth. The future he wanted to control had just shut him out. The company he built had decided it could survive without him. For a moment, maybe the most important moment of his life, Steve Jobs was not the symbol of innovation. He was a brilliant man left outside the door of his own creation, learning what obsession can build, and what it can cost.